I'm Jack Reda with Future Pastimes. I'm a designer on the expansions for the classic Dune board game, 2019 edition, published by Gale Force 9. And this video is by request. It's what factions should you leave out if you're going to be playing with any of the expansion factions to Dune. And the answers are going to vary. It's going to depend a little bit on the experience level of the players, whether you're playing basic or advanced, and the number of players you're going to have in the game. So we'll take a look at all those different combinations of possibilities, and I'll give you some recommendations. What I will start off with is if you're playing with 6 players and they're all experienced, then you can play with any combination. Doesn't matter which ones you leave out. An experienced group of players can handle everything, including having 4 economy factions in a game. It's crazy, and there will be people who say, don't do it. It's too much spice. But I say, do it. It's a wild experience having the Emperor and the Guild and Tleilaxu and Chom all in the same game. So that is how we designed these. We wanted them to be very modular, mix and match, but there certainly are going to be recommended setups, again, as I mentioned, depending on the other factors, if not everybody is experienced or if you're playing with a lower player count, for example. So the rulebook suggests if you're playing with fewer than 6 players that you leave out the Bene Gesserit in a 5-player game, and you also leave out the Guild if it's a 4-player game. And those 2 factions, I think, are going to be pretty good factions to leave out if you're going to swap in any of the new factions themselves. So because you've got Cho and the Tleilaxu are both economy factions, they're pretty good replacements for the Guild in terms of a faction to replace. And if you're going to leave out the Bene Gesserit, then Ixians and Riches, either of those is a good faction to swap in, depending on how things are going. And that's actually a pretty good rule of thumb, even at a 6-player game count. So in terms of experience level, the 2 new factions that are easiest to play are the 2 economy factions, Chom and Riches. Chom is very straightforward. It's basically you've got this income, and then you can do special things with worthless cards. A little bit of extra if you've got duplicates of, like, I've got 2 snoopers and I want to get rid of one, I can basically sell it. So it's a pretty straightforward faction to play. Probably the only element of its advantages that has any nuance is the inflation token. And that just means that at some point you're going to be doubling how much Chom charity is, including how much you get from your Chom advantage, and then canceling it or vice versa, and over the course of 2 turns. But the Tleilaxu, they've got the face dancer mechanism, which is a little more complex than just simple traitors, but it's really not a hard concept to understand. So even new players are going to grasp that. And then the other thing is their revival advantage, which is also pretty simple. So you're getting a spice for every faction that takes free revival, including yourself. And then if they pay for other revivals, they're paying the Tleilaxu. And the other part of their revival advantage is that they get no limits on their own revivals. And so they can get their leaders out when they want. They can revive more than 3 forces or 5 forces or however many. So I would not recommend that you play with the Ixians and the Riches with new players who are brand new to Dune. There's a little bit too much going on for a new player, even in basic, to really be able to play those 2 factions particularly well. Ixians may be a little bit easier to grasp, but unless you're familiar with the makeup of the Treachery deck already, you're not going to make the best decisions all the time about which cards to suppress or what is the best card in a mix necessarily. And then the element of the suboids and the cyborgs, it's a little bit like advanced styling in basic, even though you're not spending spice. So that's one of the reasons why we say don't play the Ixian faction until you are an experienced player. Now, Riches is not hard to grasp, but again, it's a faction that's really all about nuance. It's about when should you sell those cards, and how to best use your no-field tokens, and the advantage of the once-around auction versus the silent auction. There's definitely going to be times where you should use one auction method over the other when you're selling one of your cards. So again, this is a faction that is for people who know Dune really well and are craving more and a little adrenaline pump of variability in their gameplay. In terms of how to set things up for your board, a lot of times, especially if you're fairly new to Dune, you're going to want to make sure that you've got the Harkonnen and the Atreides starting on the board. They got the 10 forces on the board, and they're going to have the 3 movement, and it's good for stronghold blocking in some terms, and shaking up how things are going. I'll also recommend you have the Fremen in the game just about every time. And it's because they can get to all of the strongholds pretty easily, except for Tuix, and with the 2 movement and where they can start on the board with their shipping action. And the fact that they've got the 3 free revival means that they can, again, stronghold block. Their forces are a little more expendable, and if you're playing advanced, they've got the combat advantage of not needing to dial their forces. Plus, they've got the 3 Fedaykin, which are double strength. So I tend to keep the Fremen in the mix as much as possible. It's their planet too. I mean, come on, it's thematic. You got to have the Fremen in there, lurking in the shadows somewhere. So the other factions are a little more plug and play in terms of, well, should we include them? Should we not include them? We've definitely have played every combination of these factions in the game at a lot of different player counts. I tend to not play fewer than 5 or 6 on the whole, but 4P basic I think is a pretty good mode of play that I enjoy. And the original designers will swear up and down that it's a great 3-player game because there were 3 of them, and that's what they played a lot. And in basic, it actually is pretty good at 3-player. I just like having more factions in there because I think it creates more opportunity for the negotiation. I like having more thematic elements in the game, and the factions are all very thematic. So that's my recommendation. Yeah, if you're playing with experienced players, you can really go hog wild with these factions and mix and match as you want. With newer players or lower player counts, you're going to want to stick to mostly the base factions and maybe 1 or 2 of the expansion ones with Chom and Tleilaxu. Tleilaxu really good too because it's good for learning how to play with a different mix of factions in the game. Their leaders are expendable, and so if you're playing advanced, it gives you an opportunity to get the Gola leaders by reviving somebody else's leader as your own. And the face dancer makes the game, I think, a little more tense, and you worry about, oh, you know, why is the Tleilaxu keep picking a battle with me with only 1 force? Well, there's probably a pretty good reason for that. Chom also really easy to grasp. So that's it in a nutshell. If you've got any other specific questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. And if there's other stuff that you want to see a video on regarding Dune or any of the other future Pastimes games, let me know, and we'll get on that right away. Thanks for watching.